Welcome to Mulberry Conversations, a podcast for business leaders and job seekers, where we discuss insights and strategies with leading professionals to help you navigate the ups and downs of today's competitive job market. Today's conversation is brought to you by Mulberry Talent Partners, a full-service recruiting, temporary staffing, and executive search firm offering talent advisory services to individuals and organizations serving the Pacific Northwest and San Francisco Bay Area.
Hello, everybody. I am Kristen McConnell, the Chief Operating Officer and Talent Advisor at Mulberry Talent Partners. I am joined today by Traci Rossi, Executive Director of Friends of the Children, the Portland chapter. Traci is a highly regarded nonprofit executive with over 20 years of leadership in nonprofit organizations. Her passion revolves around helping communities and individuals thrive. Her focus on building relationships with community leaders, philanthropists, and corporate leaders to sustain, diversify, and grow a program's impact. Traci's efforts have been recognized by the Portland Business Journal as a woman of influence and as a hometown hero by the Portland Trailblazers for her service before self, style, and her positive impact on our community. Mulberry had the honor of being introduced to Traci and her team earlier this year. They came to us when they had a need to hire for their organization, and we were awarded the opportunity, and we could not feel more fortunate that we had this opportunity to build, not only just a great relationship with a new customer, but really just such a special organization in the Portland market and get to know all of you and the work that you're doing. It was our sincere privilege to not only work with them this year, but also to select them as our Mulberry 2023 philanthropic donation. Traci, hello to you and welcome to today's Mulberry conversation. I'm super excited to just be talking with you today about just the general state of affairs of the nonprofit industry, and then how our candidates and just candidates in the market who are interested in making a career pivot into nonprofit work can successfully do. So, Traci, how about you started off today with just telling us a little bit about just kind of the high level overview of what's happening in the world of nonprofit?
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Kristen. And it's an honor to be here speaking with you. And I just have to say, I am a huge Mulberry fan. I've been so delighted and impressed with the impact of what you all do. And we had a huge benefit from our end. And I love our new HR professional. So I wanted to start with that. But to talk about what I see from the nonprofit industry, as we all know, as we're wrapping up 2023, there just are a lot of pressing issues that I think we are seeing. We are all being faced with kind of personally, professionally, a lot of competing issues. And I think that's where the nonprofit sector steps in. I really look at the nonprofit industry as leaders in social impact, because at the end of the day, that is what is happening. It's how can we really fill the gaps in the needs of our society that unfortunately individuals or families or government can't necessarily address. And the nonprofit sector is really that entity, that community that is standing back and looking at the larger picture to figure out how can we help solve the problem. And I'm a big believer in not necessarily focused just on the problem, but, and this is what links us all, is what is the solution that we're all looking for? And it's being in community, and it's making sure that people, to your point, can thrive, not just survive. And so once we identify that solution, as nonprofits, we really address it very differently. And at Friends of the Children, we're looking at it in terms of how do we walk alongside underserved youth in our community, starting in kindergarten, and stay with them until 12th grade, so that they have that opportunity to really thrive, so that they then can, I believe in full circle moments, they can come back and link arms with their community and figure out how they too can help solve some of society's more pressing problems.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about Friends of the Children and the work that you do there.
Yeah, Friends of the Children, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary. Duncan and Cindy Campbell founded Friends of the Children 30 years ago. And Duncan says himself that he would have been a young man that would have benefited from an organization like Friends of the Children Portland. We are a mentoring organization, And what makes us a little unique is that we hire professional mentors to work with, like I mentioned, very underserved youth, a lot of barriers. And then we stay with those youth from kindergarten through 12th grade. And part of that 12 and a half year trajectory is really focused on what we call some of our roadmap goals. And they look at helping the youth problem solve, helping the youth think about what does hope mean. One of my all-time favorites, and it's one of the reasons that I really love Mulberry, is they talk to youth about what it means to have a spark. What is it? What is that piece that you're really excited about? What is your passion? And I think that is one of the ingredients, no matter whether you have a lot of barriers in life or not, is to live a joyful and impactful life, is to really have a passion that you lean into, and using that passion to maybe solve some of the problems in the world and in our communities. So Friends of the Children is the founding organization. And however, over those 30 years, we have now 36 other chapters across the country. And the goal is that at some point, every child that needs a friend will have a friend. And by the way, we use the terminology friend for mentor.
That's so great. We had an opportunity, Lauren and I, to attend one of your events and heard from some of your mentors, your friends that spoke, and just even had a chance just to chat with them during the networking time, and what they share as to their role and the time they put in. Because it's not just a Monday through Friday 8 to 5 opportunity. It's when can they be connecting with those kids and making a difference. And I think it was Tyler, maybe, that I had a chance
Yes,
to.
it was. Mhm.
Yeah, he had just been on a big mountain biking adventure that morning with some of his kids that he works with. And it's just, it sounds like such an incredible opportunity to truly make a difference. And, I love that your logo that says 12 plus on your website. And that speaks to the fact that you're with them for 12 plus years, which is just incredible.
Yeah. And we like to say no matter what, because there's a lot of ups and downs in those 12 and a half years, like there is in life. But what really makes that difference, I think it's part of the value proposition of Friends of the Children, is that when things get rocky, as they tend to do in any child's life, they don't bail. They're still with them. And that, I think, is the secret sauce of the model, is that the youth know that no matter what, they're going to have this program and who has their back.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, I mean, Friends of the Children is so highly regarded. What do you think makes your organization stand out?
I that no matter what piece is a part of it. So because we work with underserved youth, and that simply means that they've had a lot of systems that haven't necessarily been there for them. The no matter what piece of that is important, because unfortunately, youth and families who've had a lot of barriers, they're used to systems letting them down. When things get tough, they're used to things not necessarily working out, because unfortunately there aren't a lot of systems when you have poverty or difficult things to deal with that are helpful. Unfortunately, the 12 and 12 plus years is by design, that we are going to be here for you. And I think it has to do with trust, and
Mhm.
building trust is a huge component of that. I think another piece that, as I have the opportunity to watch mentors and the youth they work with, is there really is this art of listening. And as the youth get older, they have this relationship and they're building trust. And the mentors are really listening, and they're able to see the young person that they're working with. And so there's not a one size fit all. The 12 and a half years for one mentor and youth is going to look very different across the different youth, because they're individuals. And I think that the youth have the opportunity to be seen ups and downs and along the way. And I think that's very powerful. And I think that the function of time, which not all nonprofits have that opportunity to see and be in partnership with the youth that they're working with for such a long period of time. And I do think that has to do with it. And actually, when Duncan, who had a business and had a whole career prior to starting Friends of the Children, when he decided that he wanted to start an organization around mentoring that would address and benefit youth like he was, he asked several researchers, he did a lot of research before he opened the doors, and said, what is the added value of mentorship? Or what is that thing that's going to be very important to make it successful? And the research came back and it said longevity. And it actually can do more harm to be in a child's life and then bail than not had that relationship at all. So that 12.5 year component, I really think, is one of the fundamental pieces of why the program and the organization has been so successful.
Wow. I just envision the kind of the web of community connections that you must have as an organization to bring all of that together, getting the buy-in from the families and getting the buy-in from, is it the teacher? I mean, the teachers maybe that are making these introductions. I'm not sure how that piece, comes together, but it's just got to be multiple layers deep.
It is. It's more the schools, teachers, administrators, mentors, program managers. It really is a very large system of support. And when I first started, I saw a really important piece of research. And it was saying that if you look at relationships from the perspective of concentric circles, if you have one person in your inner circle, the chances of your being successful or having a much more difficult time in life is huge, just one person. Then if you go to the next layer of the concentric circle and you have two people, it's an exponential growth in terms of how that's going to benefit you. And sometimes we take for granted, for a lot of reasons, people might not have that one reliable source that's going to be there for them, but it makes a huge difference. And then when you start to layer on, it is exponential and it's pretty amazing. And so we have the one-on-one mentorship. That's really important to us. But by nature of being a part of the program, I think right now we have 50 mentors. The youth have a lot of other young people that are in our program, but they also have lots of other adults. So while they have the one-on-one relationship, they also have this incredible network of people that are there and they get to know. We had an alum of our program come and speak at one of our board meetings recently, and he had shared that his mentor was the best man at his wedding, but many of his guests were also other mentors from the program because he had built relationships with them along the way, which that just warmed my heart. And I think it speaks to the power of the networking piece. And again, not just mentors, there's other teachers, there's a lot of folks involved with the relationships that are built over time.
Gosh, that's incredible. It's just such impressive and important work that you're all doing, and fun. It must be really fun to see some of these things when you get to see that full circle piece come back.
It is. It's a lot of fun. And I started in 2020, March of 2020. I still shudder a little bit when I think of March of 2020. And people are like, everyone was doing something. So we all think of that time and we think about how hard it was. But I also think we're all very resilient. But I can't imagine doing anything else during that time, because I remember I wake up every morning and I felt like I was so lucky to be a witness, first of all, to the relationships that were still continuing. It was different. It wasn't in person. We got very creative, but being able to witness that things keep moving forward, even though some days were harder than others, and the resilience that was being built. And then when it was time to come back, I remember being at our Rockwood location, which is this vibrant, wonderful clubhouse, if you will, where youth come with their mentor after school. And I overheard this middle school girl, and she said, I just forgot how much I loved being here.
Oh,
I loved hearing that. And sometimes I think we take things for granted. I wondered if she would have said how much she loved being there pre-pandemic, because we get used to things, even though we love them, we get used to things. And it was nice to see that it does matter, that youth were able to come back. And it's been harder, lots of issues with everyone around sense of belonging. And it's been really difficult for our communities to rebound from such a difficult time, but they are rebounding, and it's fun to be a part of it.
Yeah. Part of me thinks that this is in some ways just going to be the most resilient generation of them all, and even just young professionals starting their career at that point as well. And just not at all what anyone was expecting, but I think there will be some resiliency as a result of all of this. And how did you start your career in nonprofit? And was that what you set out to do, or did you fall into it over time?
Yeah, no, it's not what I set out to do. So I had a wonderful time in school. English literature was my That's what I got my degree in. And I remember people asking me upon graduation, are you going to be a lawyer or a teacher? As if those were your only two choices. And I worked for a private company. I worked for Xerox for a few years. And I remember thinking, is this it? And then I decided I would work at a law firm. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. I'm from Portland, but I ventured out and I was in Washington, D.C. and I decided to work for a very high-powered law firm. And I remember on Friday nights, and we had very long hours, and it was Friday nights, I was always working on Friday nights, and it was about 7 or 8, and it would all start to happen. And what happened is I would see that the partners, and at that time, it was primarily men, they would be in their beautiful, this is DC on K Street, beautiful oak desks in their gorgeous suits, and their feet would be up, and they'd be eating their Chinese food with their chopsticks. And then I remember the women would be walking down the halls, and I call it the black tears of death. And I was in my early 20s, and I was so confused, like, why are these women walking around with these long streams of black mascara? And and that was a very important seed that was planted. And so I remember it struck me, but I didn't analyze it a lot because I was in my early 20s. I eventually quit that job because I didn't like it. And I came back to Portland because I missed being in a community. And to get back to Portland, I got this fabulous job at University of Portland, which was my first nonprofit. University is a nonprofit. And I just immediately started down the path of working in more deliberately impactful jobs that were working with underserved youth. So fast forward about 10 years after that, I had the job prior to this. I was the executive director at a wonderful nonprofit called the Center for Women's Leadership. And it's at Portland State University. And I've done a lot of nonprofit work prior to that as well. But what struck me was what I realized when I was in that role is that those women on Friday nights were crying because they were not only aspiring to be partners, because there were few women partners at that time, they were thinking about making sure kids were going to get to sports on Saturday. They were wrapping up the week. They were figuring out what's going to happen on Friday night when they're at work until the wee hours of the night. Whereas a lot of the partners, they had someone at home who was handling those, so answering those questions. And so those black tears of death was another reminder of the inequitable systems that we have. It was nothing against the men at that firm or the women couldn't measure up. It was a system that worked. And it reinforced how important it is for us to dismantle these inequitable systems. And so I think about it from a gender perspective. I also think about it from an economic perspective. And you can't dismiss the fact that there are so many Black and brown children and families that are disproportionately represented in lower income families, and that in this country, your zip code is a predictor of your economic outcomes, unfortunately. And so I say all that to say that you feel these little things when you're younger, something tugs at your heart or doesn't strike you as right. And you may not even be able to articulate. I was unable to articulate why there was such a dissonance on those Friday nights. And it just really pained me. And I didn't quite know why. It took another 12 years for me to articulate and understand what I was feeling. So I say that to say that I followed how I felt. The job at Xerox and the job at the law firm were very lucrative. I remember I got like a $7,000 bonus when I was 23 working at that law firm. It was fabulous, but it still didn't fill that hole that I had. And I didn't even know what the hole represented until it was filled. And so I say that to say that keep seeking what it is you may not even know if you're looking for. And you don't have to do it early in your career. Not everyone can get there at the same time. There's a reality of our economic outcomes. And so there's no bad job, in my opinion. I've had so many different jobs, and they've prepared me to do every single thing that I'm doing now. One job that I had, it was the shortest period of time that I've had a job. It was for a CDFI, which was a wonderful organization, a community development financial institution. And I'll never forget, it was 2 o'clock in the morning on Thanksgiving, and I was writing a report for the Treasury, Department of Treasury. And it being at that CDFI was like being a banker. And as I mentioned, I have an English degree. That's not my passion. That is definitely was not my spark. And so I moved on from that job after 9 months, and I stepped into the role at the Center for Women's Leadership. However, running that organization for 9 months was really, really helpful in terms of the financial acumen now that I have to run a larger organization. And it gave me insight into, at the time, what were areas that I didn't love. And I have fabulous people who do the finances here at Friends of the Children, but I also, as a leader, am responsible for the financial health of the organization. And so I have to have that ability to, and that skill set. So it was not the perfect fit for me, but it was extremely helpful. So I think that it takes time to land in the right spot, and we all evolve, and there's no bad job. You always learn and grow. And another piece of advice that I'll share is that when I was thinking about being an executive director, for the first time, I was talking to a colleague of mine who's had many more years of experience. And it was along the lines of, I don't know if I'm quite ready yet. And at that time, people were reaching out and asking me to look at positions. And I said, I don't know if I'm ready. And such a good piece of advice. And she said, you know what? They want you for your strengths and the assets that you bring. Be very honest about what you perceive as weakness, because you know what? They will pay for those resources to help you along the way. And that was such a great piece of advice. And so I just share that people are looking for you and are interested in you for your skill set and your strengths, and no one has it all. If they do, they're not telling you the truth. And when you figure out what those weaknesses or those areas of opportunity are, you can always bring people on your team, and you should bring people on your team because they're going to give you different perspectives that are really experts in that field. And it was such a great piece of advice.
Yeah, that's great advice just in general, like you said, but regardless of what industry you're in, if someone has reached out to you and they have identified you as a potential candidate, like you said, none of us have everything, and nor should we, because we should have opportunities to learn when we take a new position. That's what keeps us engaged. That's what keeps us excited. And if you just go in knowing it all, you're bored pretty quickly and people tend to move on. And so I do love that advice. And I also love the advice that there is no bad job. Not every job has to be forever. You can learn a lot in a really short period of time sometimes that you can then take on and do something really special with and add to your tool belt, so to speak. So if you think about someone then that wants to make that transition, that professional transition, maybe they've been in for-profit organizations for their career and they want to move to that nonprofit, what should they be thinking about in terms of what will be different for them? Is there a difference in how the organizations of for-profit versus nonprofit? Is it a noticeable difference of course, there's all the financial aspects, but what should they be prepared for?
Yeah, it is very different. At least from the experiences that I had, I think that for me, the piece about nonprofit, that what's compelling is that it's very mission driven. You don't get paid as much in terms of financial resources, but the opportunity to do a lot of different varied things, because unfortunately nonprofits are typically under-resourced. You get to try out and do a lot of different things and learn a lot of different things along the way. And I think that in the private sector, you might be really more in a particular niche in your job, and then you can change jobs, but the scope of what you're doing might be a little bit more refined than it is in many of the jobs that you will have in the nonprofit area. I think that it seems like it's more what you're doing is more explicit in for-profit, and nonprofit, you get to do all the things. I'm in the social service industry because I love it. I don't think there's one that's better than the other. It really is dependent upon how you feel and what's important to you. I know for some people, I guess an example I'll use is my own kids. So my kids went to private school for a while, and they had my daughter, she loved it and she loved learning, and they used to write like 3-page reports instead of giving grades, and it was fabulous for her. And my son, who was following in her footsteps, I remember we were reading the report he got, and it was like 3 pages, and he goes, I think they're lying. I want to know, did I get an A or a B? It really bothered him. He's like, I want it this way. So it really depends on your personality, because you're going to get different things and they are received in different ways in nonprofit versus the private sector.
Mhm.
Because, and if you want, I think, more clarity and more of a explicit pathway from one step to the next, I think private sector is a little more clear about that. I would say it feels more linear, but it's linear is not the right word. The pathway, I think, is a little more explicit, whereas in the nonprofit space, it's a lot of kind of circular motion. And I think because of that, you have the opportunity to gain a lot more experience in a short period of time.
Yeah, I would agree. In large organizations, in for-profit organizations, we refer to those as stretch assignments. And
Yes.
there's constant opportunity for stretch assignment work in a nonprofit, and to just really, and you land in areas that maybe you didn't even realize you had an interest in. And
Yes.
you get to try out new things. Is there, and I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, is there someone in your career, not, you don't have to name them by name, but is there an example that you can call on of someone that kind of made that leap, like left maybe an industry and just came into one of the organizations that you were working with, that just that pivot was successful? And what did you identify about them that you knew that they could probably make that transition?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'll start by saying is that I do think was interesting and a positive that happened in the years of the pandemic. We talked a lot about the great resignation, where people were leaving their jobs and they were hands in the air. But then after that, we start thinking about it a little differently. And I read an article that called it the Great Realignment,
Mm,
because people really had an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? This life is not necessarily promised. We're thinking a lot about our mortality. What do I want to be doing with this time that I'm spending here? And I do remember there was a role that I was in, and there was a woman actually who had spent a lot of time at a tech company, a very well established tech company, and was moving up the ladder and being paid very well. But she really, this was long before the pandemic, but she felt like she was on autopilot for so many years. And so she switched over into the nonprofit world. And it was really nice because, on the one hand, she was able to help with systems and the internal workings of a nonprofit, which, again, going back to, we have to kind of choose what we're going to focus on this year. Everything isn't always modernized and as far along as on the private sector side. So she was able to help there. But then she also really got to feel how it meant to be in a world and a community and a job where mission was its focus and people were the focus. And at the end of the day, the metrics, of course, are important because that's how we measure if we're successful. But part of those metrics were around little humans and how they were doing and how they were developing, and what the impact of that organization was going to be on that child and that family. And that's just a whole different measurement that you don't really get when you're in the nonprofit world, that if it matters to you, it's so uplifting and it means so much. Yeah, I was able to see that. And she seemed like she was much happier and able to give back in that way.
mm. When we hear that from, because we have the opportunity to speak with just such a wide range of different candidates and experiences and what they're looking for. And so often people say, I'd like to work for an organization where either the product that's being manufactured is really going to make an impact and make someone's life better,
Yes.
or do something that's more mission driven. And that does resonate with people. Absolutely. And it doesn't always have to mean that you're in a nonprofit, but gosh, it could be a life-saving medical device, or, a
Yes.
new treatment, or just many different things. There's a lot of different ways to look at it, but that's great. How does one evaluate the health of a nonprofit? So if they are thinking about making that transition, what are some things that they should be asking during an interview that can help them understand the health of the nonprofit and funding?
Really
And
good question.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that looking at the financials is really important. So you can actually understand the fiscal health of a particular organization, looking up your P&L statements. If you're not good at that, asking someone who is, the size of their budget. Most nonprofits they raise money in order to be successful. So looking at or asking about their fundraising capacity, their fundraising results is very important. Yesterday, I don't know if you read, we were fortunate enough, Kristen, to have been recognized by the Portland Business Journal as the #1 most admired nonprofit.
Amazing.
And it was really exciting. And I share that. I think that the PBJ, specifically that recognition is important because that's the business community. I mentioned that our founder, Duncan, he had a whole career in the timber industry. He also worked for juvenile justice for a while, but he is definitely has a very wonderful mind. And he started a nonprofit, but he really started it around a business case. And this business case was around underserved youth. But I think that one of the pieces that makes Friends of the Children successful is that it is built on a business model, and we have very, very discrete outcomes that we're seeking. And I think that has been something that's been very helpful for us as an organization. So as you're looking at different organizations, really thinking about you have your mission and you have your goal and you have your vision, but also from a business perspective, what are your outcomes? What are your metrics? And is the organization meeting those? Because at the end of the day, we are all looking for funders to invest in this mission, and a person who's going to grant you their resources at the end of the day to be, I think, sustainable, want to see what it is the impact that their financial contribution is going to have on the organization. And some organizations can answer that in a way that I think is going to make fundraising more successful. And I think it's a challenge for some nonprofits. I think that it's the story and the mission is really helpful. And so sometimes it can be harder if you don't have that business case. But I think that it's important from a sustainability perspective to be able, as a person interested in working at that organization, to be able to answer those questions. And then also culture is really important. Nonprofit cultures can all be very different. Is it a smaller organization? Is it a larger organization? Is there an opportunity for growth within that organization, or where you make lateral moves across the sector? And just really thinking that through. And I think those can be fun questions to answer by experiencing it, because nonprofits are so different. I started at a university, which is a nonprofit, very, very different than working for the Center for Women's Leadership. That was a smaller organization in a larger university. So just really looking at the impact of culture and opportunities for growth. And the other thing I do share is, because right now we're all experiencing a lot of economic challenges, is just to be very thoughtful from a financial perspective of what it is that you need in order to be financially sustainable. We probably don't all need as much as we think we need, but I also think that starting out in an organization that works for you, and that tends to be often a larger nonprofit, but really thinking about that, because our times are changing and it's harder for people in cities like Portland to figure out the dynamics of rent and what it takes to live your life. And so making that assessment, and that all nonprofits aren't just one single answer. You can make a little bit more at one nonprofit versus another. So it's just something to think about.
Yep. And I always have such an appreciation when talking with a candidate that they do have that clarity of I need to make this. This is what I would like to make. And
Yes, absolutely.
that is a big, and that's a good lesson for all job seekers when they're starting to think about a search, is so that you can really prioritize what's most important to me. And we all need to live and, take care of ourselves and take care of our families. But you're right. Sometimes we don't need as much as we think we need. We became accustomed to a certain, but that opportunity to do something different and make that transition. When you interview potential employees, how much of the conversation is around their interest in your particular organization and the mission of your organization? How much does that play into a decision to hire somebody?
I think it's baseline for all candidates that we look at, right? At the end of the day, I think very important that people are mission driven. So there are some folks who are like, oh, I could do this anywhere. I'm like, okay, your why. We talk a lot about what your why is. But then above and beyond that, I think it really is I am looking at mission plus, what is it about this organization? Why do you want to join this particular organization? And those answers are really important. What kind of experiences are you bringing? I also think about people often talk about what they want from an organization, which makes a lot of sense because you're getting jobs for you personally. But I also, if it's not explicitly asked, I think about what would this individual leave behind?
Mhm.
And I say that because I really think of the act of working as a collaboration and a cooperation among individuals in a community. And it's easy to come in, get your experience, and move on. But I think of so many people, and I actually think it's very healthy when people, I don't want them to do it fast, but when they transition, because I have one of my little plans is when you're working in nonprofits and specifically social justice organizations, you come and you develop, no matter where you go, you're spreading, you're planting that seed to the next place. And I think it's a beautiful thing. That's how we will actually change the world. So when I'm looking at candidates with mission being the baseline, I also think about, okay, they're going to come, but then they're also going to leave at some point. They're going to gain this experience, but what could this person leave behind? And I think that's a very intriguing thing to think about. I think about that. I don't think about it in terms of a legacy. I think about it in terms of what are the glimmers that I want to stay in the DNA of the place when I'm long gone. And I think that's whether it's explicit or implicit, something that we're looking at, we look at because it's important, because people have so many different gifts, so many different individual ways of doing things, and having that imprint on every youth that's in the organization, or and it could be finance, it could be HR, it could be operations, but just having that piece of whatever you're bringing, the essence of what you're bringing, remain, and it makes the organization that much better.
If your gift is to be an accountant and maybe you don't have that direct impact on it, on the youth or the whatever the community is that a nonprofit may serve, but just knowing that the work that you're doing is supporting those that do have that direct impact. And I think people that tend to go into this world of nonprofit or foundation work or whatever it may be, they tend to stay because they just really get that bug of making a big difference.
Yeah, and then a good example of that, because we have a fabulous CFO, Melissa, and she is very wise, and she does the numbers, but she will also be in a leadership team meeting, and she'll say, "This is how our values as an organization show up in this budget." Right. So she, in her way, is connecting those dots from her discipline and her vantage point. And it's like, yeah, that does matter. At the end of the day, nothing matters more, because you can say all the things, but if it's not reflected in your finances, then you're not living your values.
That's right. That's right. And she talked about that when we had that initial conversation with her. She found her way as an accounting professional to have her mark on the organization. And that's great. That's wonderful. My gosh, Traci, thank you so much. I could just chat with you all day.
Likewise, this was
So,
fun.
I mean, I feel like I was just telling Lauren, I'm like, I feel like we gained a friend of our own friend. And just with Traci and your team, you're just such a wonderful, wonderful group of individuals just doing such, important work and fun work. And our community is just better for it. And we're lucky to have had this opportunity to get to know you.
We feel the same way. And I was actually reflecting on this because when I talked a little earlier about listening, I think that's going to be my theme for 2024 is listening, because that's one of, I think the part of the magic of mentoring is that the mentors listen to the youth. And I knew from day one, when we had this wonderful conversation with you and your team about what it is that we didn't quite know, we had a good sense of what we wanted, but you all really listened over a course of a few conversations and was able to really integrate all of those things and came up with the most amazing candidates And I think that's where our partnership started. And I think the power of listening is phenomenal. So I just want to thank you all for being such great partners. Thank you for the kindness and your end of the year gift to Friends of the Children Portland. It really makes a huge difference. And we're so grateful. And just, yeah, I feel like it's the beginning of a wonderful relationship and partnership. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everybody who tuned in and listened today. We appreciate it and can't thank Traci enough for her time for being so generous today. And gosh, wishing everyone just happy holidays from the Mulberries. I can't believe we are wrapping up the year and
Can't believe it.
it just flew by. I think I think everyone's excited for 24 and see what it's going to bring. And I like the idea of having listening be the anchor to all of it, because I think it'll be another unique year.
Thank you, Kristen. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. To dive deeper into today's conversations, please visit us at mulberrytalent.com, where you can find additional resources and conversations, learn more about Mulberry, and see our complete service offerings in specialty areas including human resources, administrative office, finance, accounting, payroll, and operations. And don't forget to subscribe to Mulberry Conversations on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform.